This is light work. Come on, spill the tea. Yeah. Ooh.
Hey y'all,
What's good?
I'm Laura.
I'm Dee, and welcome to Spill the Tea with Laura and Dee.
Oh, what are we chatting about today?
I'm glad you asked. Our Candid Convo for today is the new buyer-seller dynamic in the Atlanta real estate market.
So I think that's a fantastic question.
So, realtor, help us with
Right.
what is a buyer's market versus a seller's market as we talk through this topic.
So I think that's important to know. I think that's a great question. And the difference between each market is dictated by how many months of supply you have in inventory. And so a seller's market is going to be 0 months of inventory, which was 2020.
Right.
Like if you were buying in 2020, there was less than 1 month worth of inventory in every market across this country. Right.
And it was a shock for everybody. Sellers were so happy.
I know, right? It was fabulous for sellers, not fabulous for buyers. Now, that seller's market stays a seller's market up until you have about 5 months worth of inventory. Now, if you have less than a month worth of inventory, it's a much stronger seller's market than it is at 4.5 months worth of inventory. A neutral market is going to be 5 to 7 months. And then a buyer's market is going to be 7 months or more.
Right.
And so people ask, when are we going to see a recession? When are we going to see prices go backwards? When does that start to happen? How does that start to happen? Well, it depends on what kind of market it is. Is it a seller's market? Is it a neutral market? Is it a buyer's market? And what I think is really interesting is we are starting to see those markets look different in cities and in states. And for a long time, they didn't. For a long time, everybody's market was just a seller's market. It's been a seller's market since I got my real estate license in 2015. It's 10 years.
Wow.
We've never seen a market with that kind of history.
Right.
We're in uncharted real estate territory.
So do you think at any point, what is it, NAR, do they kind of like update some of those standards at all? And is it based on 10-year trends, 5-year trends?
So the real estate market for a long time followed about a 7-year trend. We would see an upward climb. You would see a correction, like buyers went a little bit, but then you would see the market kind of go back up. Right now, I think it depends on who you talk to, right? This expert has one opinion.
Of course.
That expert has another opinion. My opinion is location and what is driving your market. I think today more than ever, it's important to know what's driving the market, because if you know what's driving the market, then you understand what's coming next. Right. And in buying in real estate, you hear people say, well, I lost in real estate. Well, you lost in real estate for one of two reasons. Either you sold when the market was down because you had to, right? Or just wanted to, for whatever reason, cut your losses. Sometimes that's a better, or you weren't looking 5 moves ahead. When you bought that house, you weren't pacing the market and looking at what you were doing with that house in 5 years. When you guys bought, we knew you were buying to sell in 3 years. We bought in one of the cheapest markets possible because that market is going to consistently move. Right. You knew that in 3 years, you might be living in a less desirable area, but in 3 years, you were still going to be living in the cheapest houses in Atlanta, meaning you were still going to be living in a market that was going to move.
Right. All for the dream of that, what's it, the dream home? That's what Lexi calls it.
Right. There you go. All for the dream home. You live a little uncomfortable for a few years to get to the comfort,
Right. And
down the road.
Just for clarity purposes, the concept of inventory, months of inventory. So for instance, 4 months inventory, if we stopped putting more houses on the market, it would take 4 months for that to all get soaked up or purchased.
That is a perfect explanation of what a month worth of inventory is. Correct.
Okay.
If nothing else hit the market today, what would that market look like in 4 months? There would be no houses.
Right.
What would that market look like in 6 months? Well, if we're 14 months worth of inventory, half that inventory would still be sitting there.
Right. So one thing that I find very interesting is some houses that were, and I feel like you mentioned this a lot, but some houses that were listed for sale during the holiday season aren't really seeing a lot of this action that's kind of going on lately where, some of these houses are just selling very
So that's
well.
flipped over the last 30 days. That's flipped a little bit.
Right. Okay. So that's why I guess we'll jump into the numbers a bit, but
Yeah.
that's why like the days on market has slowly started to kind
Yep.
of come down.
So if you look at days on market, I'm just going to open this for reference. So if you look at days on market as a whole, the Atlanta market is starting to shift. The Atlanta FMLS market. So what does that define? That is every home listed on the FMLS, which is the Atlanta's multiple listing service. So that's Atlanta, the suburbs of the suburbs, and even a little further out in some cases. We're actually hitting almost 5 months of inventory. We're at 4.7 months of inventory on the FMLS.
Wow.
So what that says to me is there are some areas of Atlanta that are starting to really sit inside the city. I think I took that off because we pulled up Dallas a minute ago, but inside the Atlanta city, inside 285, you have a lot of condos. You have a lot of flippers. The market is getting saturated with that first-time home buyer price point, and nobody's coming backwards, right? That market has seen a bit of a correction. It was headed towards 400,000. It's pulled back in some cases almost to 300,000. And sellers and buyers are at a standoff. But then if you move over into an area, say like Alpharetta, it's still a strong seller's market. You're at 3.6 months worth of inventory. It's not a strong seller's market, but when you look at kind of days on market and how many days those homes are sitting, you're going to find that Alpharetta's days on market is smaller than your entire FMLS area or your Atlanta area. Now, something I do think is very cool. Alpharetta used to be the place to be, right? That North Fulton bubble used to really be like the location everybody moved to. Alpharetta is starting to feel like the city,
because there's
right?
so many folks there now.
There's so many people. Most of our roads are 4 or 6 lanes. 400 runs right through us. It's a big city feel, and there's a lot of people moving to what used to be the suburbs of the suburbs. You're starting to see people move out towards Woodstock, towards Marietta, towards Canton, even as far out as Dallas, which is like the suburbs of the suburbs. And you see your days or your months of inventory is 4 months or less in all of those markets.
So a lot of my family kind of live quite a long time throughout like Hiram County and whatever county Dallas is also in. And
Paulding, I think.
Yeah, Paulding. And so it's like, for me, I always grew up knowing the area. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah, no, my uncle lives out there, my aunt lives out there, my grandmother. And so you would never hear anyone else talk about it. Like, you would mention it and they'd be like, hi,
Dallas, Texas.
Dallas. So, yeah, Dallas, Texas. And it's like, no, we have one in Georgia.
It's the sticks.
And so now that it's so much more expensive to move to some of those areas that were traditionally seen as the suburbs,
which are now
I feel like
city.
now, has become Metro Atlanta. And the suburbs are now the places where it's just like, what is this?
That used to be more
what Ball Ground, Georgia?
Yes.
What? This is here?
Yes. And you're seeing a lot of your smaller towns, right? Your towns that were mill towns, Rome, Cartersville, Harley, to your point, Dallas, all of those little towns that were kind of dead because the mills had gone away or whatever. They're starting to revitalize. They're putting more money into the schools. They're building bigger, better houses. I mean, you can get a 5,000 square foot house out there for like 400,000. That's nothing. I mean, that's nothing, right? I just bought 2 townhouses out there for less than 400,000, or at 400,000, I guess. 3 bedroom, 2 bath, each 200 grand. And so families, right? The suburban families are moving out to those areas. And so that kind of brings you to days on market. Right. So for a while at the beginning of this year, we were trending upwards, to your point. People were listing at the holidays. You had those sellers and those buyers that were just at a standoff. The buyers were like, I'm not paying that. And the sellers were like, I'm not coming down. And so what's happened in February was we did see a small interest rate reduction. And you can see as soon as the interest rates go down, days on market goes down. What does that mean? Buyers are starting to buy. Right? Buyers are starting to buy. Are we going to see an interest rate rise in June? Possibly. If we see that, I think you'll see buyers slow down. But I also think buyers have accepted the fact that we're not going to see interest rates under 5.5%, under 6% again. So they're kind of jumping in. And so you're starting to see those days on market. But again, your entire FMLS area is at 33 days. Now, surprisingly enough, Alpharetta is also at 33 days. Marietta was at 16. Again, showing those suburban areas
Right.
are really what's kind of taken off. The areas where prices feel still comfortable for Atlanta.
Right.
And Atlanta prices aren't going anywhere. Let's just
No,
let's
they're
just
not.
like people are not going to stop moving out of California. They're not going to stop moving out of New York, where the
Right.
prices are so inflated that when they come here, they're like, oh, a mill, who cares? Right? It's easy. But I do think you're going to continue to see the days on market. I'm interested to see what happens early summer, but I think you're going to see days on market continue to go down.
Right. Okay. So I feel like a lot of like the newer families that we're starting to see, someone kind of brought up a good point, and they were saying, you know, a lot of the ones with the families that are able to help them get houses, a lot of those are the ones that are really getting some of the good deals. But because of like the interest rates and because of the prices and because of people's budgets, a lot of people are really moving out to those outer areas to get houses that can actually, that they can grow a family in, right? Because that's me and Lexi's biggest like
but I'll
struggle
tell you,
right now.
It's not just families looking to grow houses. So you're very much in the minority. You're a very young human owning a home in today's society, okay?
Fair enough.
Y'all are early 30s. Yesterday, I sat at the closing table with a woman who has grown children and 3 grandchildren, and she was buying her very first house of her life. Like this was the first home she ever owned.
Right.
And home ownership is getting harder and harder and harder because it's getting more expensive.
Sure. Right.
And, you know, whether we see a pullback in the market or not, life is going to continue to get expensive. Show me a point in our civilization where the scale ever actually continued to come down. Does it come down? Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
But it always goes back up, right? It always
because there's always a need for real estate.
Well, in life is always going to continuously get more expensive.
Right. And people are just populating.
Correct. Correct. And the most wealthy person is always going to continue to grow their wealth, and there's always going to be people behind them, right? So that mentality is never going to go away. I was laughing the other day. I was watching a show, and there was like a reward for a wanted person, $250, and the whole show was looking for him. I was like, man, $250, I wouldn't even get off my couch.
Right. I'd be like, oh, okay, cool.
Cool. See y'all.
Add 3 more zeros. We'll think about it.
And that was only 100 years ago, right? This show was set in 1923, so 102 years ago. And I think about my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids, and I think, oh my God, you know, you can buy a new house, you know, first-time home buyer house in the Atlanta market today is $400,000. Back then, it was like you could buy it for like, I mean, in the 80s, you could buy it for like $90,000.
Right.
What is that going to look like in another 40 or 100 years?
Whenever I'm talking with like sellers, it's like, you got this house for how much?
I know, it's shocking. It's shocking. So that's not going to go away,
right? Of course,
and that's the point. It's not going to go away, and so you just have to be smart, understand your market when you're buying, and that's the best way to get into a home. Absolutely. It's not just your generation, your age trying nowadays. It's every generation. I mean, there are people buying their first homes in their 50s.
Right, and there's also the generation like my sisters. Right. Some of them maybe not quite as much, right? But they're starting to get to a point where they could make purchases of homes too. Jordan just did.
Yeah, I have a 19-year-old who owns a home. That is true.
So,
and I talked to somebody yesterday, actually, and this is another perspective, and this is interesting, and I'm interested to see how this kind of plays in the market. There are a lot of people where home ownership is no longer the American dream, right? Like that is not the objective. It's changing, being an influencer, doing this, doing that, right? And it's shifting. And so I talked to a couple yesterday who they had sold their house, was under contract. And so I asked, are you buying? They were like, nope, we're renting. You're renting? How old are you? 44. We're renting. We love the fact that we're renting. We don't want to own. We don't want the headache. We don't want the responsibility. We've owned for the last 10 years. Our kids are grown. The last one just moved out of the house.
Right.
It's like, well, let's talk about condos and stuff that's not a headache, because investing in your future, I mean, that's a great savings account if nothing else.
Of course.
And I hate to see people move away from that because no one saves as disciplinedly as they do inside a home, right? Like we just don't.
That's a really good way of looking at that.
And so I know it's a headache, I know it's hard, but even if paying a huge HOA fee, I'd rather see you pay a big HOA fee and somebody else to care for the property than you try to invest that somewhere else, unless you're just a super savvy investor, which, let's admit it, 90% of us aren't.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I don't own stuff. At least not ones I manage.
You know what time it is?
Time for question quickies.
Yes, you remembered. So, is now a good time to buy or sell?
Oh my God, I love that question. Yes, it's always a good time to buy, and it's always a good time to sell.
Mm-hmm.
Again, when you buy, you want to have a plan. Look 5 steps ahead. Don't buy because you want this house today.
That plan is important.
Right. That plan is so important. I mean, your cousin is one of my favorite examples. Megan, she was
Mhm.
like, I want the house that I want right. I'm like, no. Right. And she listened, and she was very disciplined, and she really dialed it back down. And she's been in her house now for probably a year and a half
Mm-hmm.
ish.
Yeah.
And I would say, she got started. She doesn't love her home, right? It's like not her favorite place ever.
You
But
never do for the first one.
correct. But she had a plan, and she was super disciplined. And I
Right.
think in 3 to 5 years, especially again buying a less expensive home in the Atlanta market in a great area. I mean, she's right there in Norcross.
Right.
I think she's going to be able to sell it for a great price and be able to achieve the goals and find that forever home
Mm-hmm.
with the closet that is as big as my office.
Right.
For all of the shoes.
Using that
she
forced
owns.
savings, like you said.
There you go. There you go. So it's always a good time to buy. It's always a good time to sell.
Which means it's always a good time to call Lerman team.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. But understand your market, right?
Right.
Like that's the more important part of that. Like if you're buying in these cities, understand how many days on market, understand how many months worth of supply.
Right.
Don't buy emotionally. Don't ever buy a house emotionally.
Right. Yeah. And
don't
it
sell it
happens all
emotionally.
the time,
Oh,
right?
God.
But the
Like,
plan
all
helps
the
with that. The plan very much helps
Correct.
with that. How do interest rates affect home buying?
Oh, a ton. When they're low, people feel like it's free money. When they're
Right.
high, they feel like they're getting screwed,
Right.
even though they pay 30% on their credit cards.
Right.
I don't get it. I don't get that perspective. Like, think about what you're saying, humans, but interest rates affect at a substantially high rate, right?
Right.
When they are low, people are apt to spend more. They feel more. You have a bigger budget when interest rates are low, so you're happier with
Mhm.
what you're purchasing. When interest
Right.
rates are high, but a bigger chunk of that payment goes to interest, so you have
Right.
less to spend on the house from the monthly standpoint. And so a lot of times you're not as happy with what you're buying when the
Mhm.
interest rates are higher. And so it's an emotional play on the human brain.
Right.
And when you can grab onto someone's emotions, you can lead them around as if they were a fish on a hook.
Right. Right.
Where do I want you?
Right.
Right up here on my little frying pan.
Right.
So don't purchase emotionally ever.
Right.
Make a logical purchase. Don't let the interest rates affect your purchase.
So the way I look at how interest rate affects a purchase is just the budget.
Correct.
Right. And it's like right now, as the interest rates are so high, it almost forces people to look at the budget. Right. When interest rates were low, people weren't really, they were like, how big of a house can I get?
Right. How much can I spend? I'll pay more.
Right.
Here's
It's like,
50 grand
what
more
was I
cash.
approved for? Like, and how do I determine my home's value?
Oh, you call me, duh.
Yes, absolutely.
So actually start on Zillow or one of the websites out there. My website has a home valuation tool.
Mhm.
Start with a home valuation tool online.
Right.
Know that when you click on a home,
Corman Homes also has a home valuation
we
tool.
do.
It takes you to yours. So.
Oh, well, yes, we do, but still, we do. But start with the home valuation tool. Understand that when you click,
Mhm.
like someone's buying that click. So you're
Mhm.
selling your phone number. Expect a
Right.
phone call. If you don't get a phone call or a text message or an email or some kind of reach out from that company, they probably don't hire them because they're probably not doing the job.
Right.
Right. So start there, but start with a valuation tool. It's going to give you a really good idea of the overall market
Mhm.
and what your home would sell for if it was in the same condition as the average home in that market.
Right.
So are you in a new construction area? Well, if you are and you've got an older home, you're going to have to bring your house up to speed with what that looks like.
Right.
As far as if that's the price point you want, because buyers care about what the inside looks like now.
Right.
5 years ago, 6 years ago, I don't think
People
they
didn't
cared.
care, no.
Mm-mm. They didn't know to care.
Right. But then also, you could afford not to care.
Well,
Right. Because you would move into somewhere
location drove
based
the
on
price.
location,
Mhm.
and then you just pay a little bit to fix it up.
Correct.
Now that hurts the bank. That hurts folks' pocketbooks.
Well,
so it's like
people
that's
have been
not so commonplace
educated
anymore.
on HGTV.
Oh, fair
on how
enough. So they'll go
to-
do it themselves, I guess.
Well, no, but on HGTV, it shows you if this house is in this condition, this is what you should pay for it.
Oh, okay, I see.
Right? So HGTV has unknowingly educated the
folks.
buyer market
Mhm.
that if you've got an A+ house, you should pay an A+ price, right? All these renovators are getting way more than what the average sales price is
Mhm.
in their local market, and they flash that on the TV.
Right.
So that tells a buyer, hey, buyer, if you're looking at an A+ house and you actually want to buy it, then guess what? You have to pay more than an A- price.
Right.
Right? But when those buyers are seeing those investors buy that house in the first place, they're seeing that they're buying a B-, a B+, a C- or lower.
So then they go do it themselves.
Correct. And so
Right.
they're coming to their realtor and they're like, well, I don't like, I got to redo this kitchen. I don't want to pay what they paid. Right? And so that's really starting to drive the conversation with the buyer's agent and the buyer.
Oh, I think that's great.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's so good.
Right.
Every home is going to start selling for its actual value.
As opposed to like perceived
emotion.
Right.
HGTV is teaching the buyer how to take the emotion
out
of their purchase.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because they're showing it from a number
Go
standpoint.
HGTV.
Listen, I know. I love it. I like education, right? Like I like when a client's educated on what they're doing.
Right.
And I just think it's very cool because people don't even realize it's happening in their brains. It's like, oh,
exactly.
You're right. I don't want to pay that because neither did Joanna Gaines.
Right.
Right? Or Christina Tark. I don't think that's her last name now. But they want to do the same thing that the flippers did because that feels good. Right. It's a win on TV and you're like, yeah, they won and yeah, I want to win.
Right.
And so, home values, right? So that's where you start is with a valuation tool.
Right.
And then again, kind of following up to that, if you want to know the actual home valuation, does it go up? Does it stay unilateral or does it go down? You want to get with an agent who understands the market, understands how to rate homes, and understands how to value homes based on condition.
Right.
You know, to your point, why are homes sitting? Homes only sit in a market
when they're priced too high.
Because they're not priced at a price point that motivates a buyer to purchase.
Yeah, if you price a little bit lower, somebody will come look through there.
Correct.
Looking for a bargain.
Not even so looking for a bargain. People just want to pay what they feel the home is worth in today's market. They don't want to feel like they've overpaid. That doesn't feel good and that's going away.
I feel like my family associates that with the bargain.
A lot of buyers do. But I am finding that after an educated conversation, most buyers realize that they're not looking for a bargain. They actually just don't want to feel like they got taken advantage of.
I agree with that.
Right? And in their head, they associate that with the bargain. But when you ask them the question, well, would you sell your house in this market for a bargain? Right? And then they're like, well, no. Do you want to buy a house? Yes. Okay, are you willing to pay a reasonable price based on the data that we review? And are you willing to work with me until we find a seller who is willing to sell their house for a reasonable price based on the data we review?
Right.
And then that feels good.
Right.
Then you don't feel like you've overpaid. You feel like you've educated yourself and you've paid the right price. So as a seller, it's important to look at all of that when you're evaluating the home. Because if you price it correctly, or even in the realm of correctly, within 3%, 4% is kind of high, but within 3% of what it should be priced at, you're probably going to get multiple offers in the Atlanta market in this environment.
Right.
Even if you're high. I mean, I had one we priced at $255 the other day, multiple offers, and we got $245, more than we were expecting, but we still had multiple offers because we were still within the range.
Right.
We weren't so absurdly high.
Well, that wraps up our topics for today and the questions that we had.
Fantastic.
Thanks, everybody, for joining Spill the Tea with Laura and Dee. As always, if you thought this was helpful or entertaining, hit the heart, send to a friend. Also, if you have a question for a flipper or a real estate professional, drop us a note below and we'll answer in an upcoming video. Peace.
This is light work. Come on, spill the tea. Yeah. Ooh.